Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack a fascinating, completely hidden story that is literally attached to your car right now. We're taking a close look at Continental's sustainable natural rubber sourcing policy. It's this incredibly comprehensive document that tackles what has got to be one of the absolute most complex supply chains on the planet.
It really begs the question, right? Do you actually know where the natural rubber in your tires comes from? We slap them on our cars, we drive thousands of miles, but we rarely stop to think about the origin of this everyday product. Natural rubber is an agricultural product, and the global trade behind it operates on a massive, largely unseen scale. To give you a real idea of that scale, just look at this number, over $6 million. That is more than 6 million individual farmers globally producing the world's natural rubber. We are not talking about an industry controlled by just 2 or 3 giant mega farms. It is a highly decentralized, incredibly complex network of individuals. And honestly, trying to reform a system with over 6 million independent players, that is an enormous undertaking. So clearly we need a roadmap to figure out how Continental plans to untangle this web. We're going to cover 1. The complex rubber journey, 2. Continental's 2030 goal, 3. Respecting people, 4. Minimizing environmental impact, and finally 5. Tracking it right back to the source.
All right, part 1, the complex rubber journey, mapping out the global trade.
Now, what's really interesting as you look at this setup is that to fix a supply chain, you first have to map out exactly how the rubber travels from a distant tree all the way to a finished tire. Notice how the supply chain is broken into 3 tiers: upstream, midstream, and downstream. Continental actually sits right there in the middle, the midstream, as the manufacturer. They don't have direct contracts with the farmers planting the trees. But Continental openly acknowledges that the absolute biggest environmental, social, and labor challenges exist way up in that upstream segment. They are physically and contractually totally removed from the exact place where the biggest impacts happen.
So let's break down that complex upstream chain, because it's tricky. At the top, you've got the producers. Get this, a staggering 85% of rubber comes from small farms, basically smallholders. From there, it gets passed to dealers, and we're often talking multiple middlemen here who collect and trade it. Then it hits the processors, who turn that raw sap into a usable material. And finally, the traders, who broker the sales to companies like Continental. The raw material literally passes through so many hands before it ever sees a factory floor. Moving to part 2, Continental's 2030 goal, their vision for sustainable sourcing.
Knowing how insanely tangled this web is, here is their overarching vision for cleaning it up. Their commitment is absolute, 100%. By the year 2030, Continental is fully committed to sourcing 100% of their natural rubber from sustainable origins. That is a massive line-in-the-sand commitment for one of the world's biggest consumers of natural rubber.
So, the crucial point is how they actually plan to get there. Well, they've deployed 4 systematic commitments to hit this goal. First, respect for people. Second, minimize environmental impacts. Third, ensure a fair and equitable value chain. And fourth, practice responsible sourcing. These 4 pillars pretty much guide every single decision they make. And it's amazing to see how these internal policies map perfectly onto global priorities. These commitments directly align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For example, Goal 1, no poverty, and Goal 13, climate action. By enforcing their commitments, Continental is directly targeting poverty reduction for those millions of smallholders, while also pushing for vital climate action through better farming practices. Which brings us to Section 3, respecting people, upholding human rights and dignity.
Zooming in on this first pillar shifts our focus to the most vulnerable element of the whole chain, the people. And the language Continental uses to protect them is incredibly strong. 0 tolerance for all forms of forced labor. 0 tolerance for all forms of child labor. 0 tolerance for all forms of land grabbing. These aren't just polite suggestions. These are absolute, non-negotiable boundaries. If a supplier violates these labor rights, Continental is done. They will not do business with them. And a huge part of preventing that land grabbing is a principle known as FPIC. That's free, prior, and informed consent. Continental strictly requires that Indigenous peoples and local communities be consulted before any activity affects their land. This empowers Indigenous communities with a real voice and a veto over corporate land use. No consent? The development just doesn't happen. But it goes way beyond just preventing abuses. Continental actively demands decent working and living conditions.
We're talking written employment contracts, actual decent living wages, transparent hours, and safe workplaces. And if workers live on site, those suppliers have to provide decent housing, safe drinking water, and proper sanitation. It takes this big, abstract corporate policy and turns it into a genuine story of human empathy and dignity for folks on the ground.
Pivoting now to Section 4, minimizing environmental impact, protecting forests and resources. So we've covered the human footprint, but what about the ecological one? Rubber farming has a major impact there too. And Continental draws a very clear line regarding deforestation. Compliant sourcing means actively protecting high-carbon stock forests, safeguarding wildlife, and strictly avoiding peatlands, whether they're wet, drained, or dry. But look over at the non-compliant side. Any rubber from an area deforested after October 2018 is strictly prohibited. That hard cutoff date is crucial. It ensures suppliers can't just clear-cut a new forest today and magically call the rubber sustainable. Now, here is a truly surprising and honestly fascinating fact. To ease the burden on those tropical rubber trees, Continental is heavily investing in an alternative called Tarex Sagum. Ready for this? It's rubber derived from Russian dandelions. No way, right? Because dandelions can be grown in temperate zones using normal agricultural land, Continental can grow them much closer to their tire factories. This massively reduces transport distances, cuts down carbon emissions, and gives them incredible supply flexibility, since you can plant them every single year. And finally, Section 5, tracking to the source, transparency, and governance. Let's move to and see how this builds, because none of these amazing human rights or environmental policies matter one bit if you can't actually prove they're happening. Back in 2018, Continental launched a pilot project in Indonesia, specifically to figure out how to track rubber from those small holders. In 2019, they stepped up as a founding member of the Global Platform for Sustainable Natural Rubber to get the whole industry working together. And their immediate goal for the next 3 years? To achieve 100% full traceability of rubber from all industrial plantations. They are building this infrastructure of transparency step by step.
And to enforce all this, they use strict governance mechanisms. They do risk-based supply chain mapping, and they set up hard audit and verification processes. Now, if a supplier is found to be non-compliant, Continental doesn't just instantly walk away. They create time-bound implementation plans to help fix the issue. But if those suppliers refuse to clean up their act, that's it. Continental will officially suspend or terminate the business relationship. So yeah, this policy has real teeth. Which brings us right back to where we started. Think about it. The next time you hit the road, what footprint will your tires leave behind? Continental's policy really shows us that with rigorous tracing, strict human rights standards, and wild innovations like dandelion rubber, that footprint can absolutely change for the better by 2030. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.